The year is 1658. The greatest empire in Indian history stands at a crossroads. Four brothers, sons of the mighty Shah Jahan, are about to engage in a battle that will change the course of history forever. But this isn't just another tale of royal succession. This is the story of a man who would become the most powerful and most controversial Mughal emperor of all time. A man who expanded an empire to its largest extent, yet sowed the seeds of its eventual collapse. A brilliant military commander who lived like a religious ascetic. A ruler who built magnificent mosques while destroying ancient temples. But before we dive into this epic tale, let me ask you something. What would you do if achieving your destiny meant betraying everything you loved? This is Aurangzeb, and his story begins not with power, but with a letter. Written by a young prince who would soon make a decision that would shake the foundations of an empire. Born on October 14, 1618, Aurangzeb wasn't just any Mughal prince. He was the third son of Shah Jahan, yes, the same Shah Jahan who built the Taj Mahal. But unlike his siblings, who reveled in the luxury of the Mughal court, young Aurangzeb showed signs of being different. While his brothers Dara Shikoh and Shah Shuja attended lavish court festivities, 9-year-old Aurangzeb was often found in the company of religious scholars, memorizing the Quran. His father noticed this early inclination toward religious devotion, but couldn't have predicted how it would shape the future of his empire. But there's something fascinating about young Aurangzeb that most history books don't tell you. Despite his religious devotion, he was also training to become one of the most skilled warriors of his time. By age 15, he could split a grain of rice with an arrow while riding horseback. This combination of spiritual dedication and military prowess would become his trademark and his tragedy. However, beneath this perfect princely exterior, a storm was brewing. You see, in the Mughal court, being third in line to the throne meant something very specific and very dangerous. By his teenage years, Aurangzeb had already learned the most crucial lesson of Mughal politics. Survival meant excellence, and excel he did, but in ways that would both impress and worry his father, Shah Jahan. At just 16, Aurangzeb received his first military command, a test that would prove his worth or mark his failure. The year was 1634, and the Bundela rebellion had erupted in central India. Most expected the young prince to rely on his generals, to command from the safety of his tent, but Aurangzeb had other plans. The teenage prince, against all protocol, leads from the front. His soldiers, initially skeptical of their young commander, watch in awe as he personally leads the charge against the rebel stronghold. The battle rages for hours, but Aurangzeb's tactical genius prevails. By sunset, the rebellion is crushed, and a new military legend is born. But this victory revealed something deeper about Aurangzeb's character. Unlike his brothers, who celebrated their triumphs with grand feasts and poetry recitals, Aurangzeb marked his success by distributing his entire share of the spoils to his soldiers and spending the night in prayer. This combination of military brilliance and austere piety would become his hallmark, and eventually his weapon. Meanwhile, back in the glittering courts of Agra, his elder brother Dara Shikoh was becoming their father's favorite. Dara Shikoh was everything Aurangzeb wasn't: a patron of arts, a student of multiple religions, and a champion of secular policies. But while Dara Shikoh enjoyed court life, Aurangzeb was building something far more valuable: loyalty among the empire's military commanders. The turning point came in 1645, when Aurangzeb was appointed governor of Gujarat. What seemed like an honorary position became a masterclass in administration. He streamlined tax collection, cracked down on corruption, and established a network of spies that would later prove invaluable. But more importantly, he was learning the art of governing and waiting. Yet beneath this successful exterior, Aurangzeb was growing increasingly troubled. His letters from this period reveal a man wrestling with deep internal conflicts. He wrote to his father, "The throne is a glorious burden, but the path to it is paved with broken trusts and severed bonds." These words would prove prophetic. By 1657, Aurangzeb had proven himself in multiple campaigns, from the treacherous mountains of Balkh to the wealthy ports of Gujarat. But fate was about to deal a hand that would force him to choose between family loyalty and what he saw as his divine destiny. Shah Jahan fell gravely ill, and the empire held its breath. What happened next would shock even the most seasoned courtiers, because Aurangzeb was about to reveal a plan so ambitious, so ruthless, that it would change the very nature of the Mughal Empire. And it began with a simple message to his youngest brother, Murad. But to understand what made Aurangzeb take such a drastic step, we need to look at what was really happening behind the jeweled screens of the Mughal court, where a very different kind of battle was being fought. 1657, Shah Jahan lies bedridden in Agra fort. But this isn't just a story of an emperor's illness, it's about to become the most dramatic power struggle in Mughal history. 4 brothers, 4 armies, and 1 throne. Let me paint you a picture of what was really happening. While Shah Jahan was still alive, his eldest son Dara Shikoh had already started acting as de facto emperor. But here's what most people don't know. Dara Shikoh made a crucial mistake. He began removing military commanders loyal to his brothers, replacing them with his own men. In the complex chess game of Mughal politics, this was equivalent to declaring war. Aurangzeb's response was brilliant in its calculation. First, he did something unexpected. He allied with his younger brother Murad. Writing to him, he claimed, "I seek only to protect our faith and have no desire for the throne. Once we defeat Dara Shikoh, the throne shall be yours." But those who knew Aurangzeb's careful nature suspected there was more to this alliance. The empire split into 4 factions: Dara Shikoh in Agra, backed by Shah Jahan, Shah Shuja advancing from Bengal, Aurangzeb and Murad marching from the Deccan, and the empire's nobility secretly choosing sides. Dara Shikoh represented religious tolerance and philosophical synthesis. Aurangzeb stood for orthodox Islam and traditional values. Shah Shuja promised Bengali autonomy. Murad offered the nobles increased powers. The first decisive battle came at Damat. Aurangzeb's military genius showed itself in full force. Instead of following conventional warfare, he divided his forces into 3 parts, using the terrain to his advantage. The imperial army, despite outnumbering him, fell into his trap. By sunset, Dara Shikoh's forces were in retreat, and Aurangzeb had won his first victory in the Succession War. But something changed in Aurangzeb during this battle. His letters from this period reveal a man convinced of divine support. He wrote, "Victory comes not from numbers, but from Allah's will." This religious conviction would later shape his entire reign. The defining moment came at the Battle of Samugar. Picture this, a scorching June day in 1658. Dara Shikoh's massive army faces Aurangzeb's forces, but Aurangzeb had an advantage. He knew his brother's weakness. Dara Shikoh was brave, but impetuous. As predicted, Dara Shikoh charged personally into battle, leaving his command position. This single decision changed everything. What happened next showed Aurangzeb's true nature. After defeating Dara Shikoh, he moved against his ally Murad. At a celebratory feast, Murad was arrested, the cup of wine in his hand used as evidence that he was unfit to rule according to Islamic law. The man who claimed to want no throne was now systematically eliminating all obstacles to it. The final act was perhaps the most tragic. Shah Jahan, still alive, was confined to Agra fort by his own son. From his prison, he could see the Taj Mahal, the monument he built for his beloved wife. Aurangzeb wrote to him, "A kingdom can have no partnership." The old emperor would spend his last 8 years as a prisoner, watching the empire he built transform under his most ambitious son. But securing the throne was just the beginning. Aurangzeb was about to embark on a mission to reshape the entire empire, a mission that would create the largest Mughal territory ever and plant the seeds of its eventual destruction. And it all began with a controversial decree that would echo through centuries. 1659. The throne is secured, But the empire Aurangzeb inherited was vastly different from the one he envisioned. What followed was one of the most dramatic transformations of a civilization in history. Imagine the shock at the Mughal court when Aurangzeb's first official act as emperor was to ban music. The same corridors that once echoed with melodious ragas now fell silent. But this was just the beginning. The new emperor had a master plan that would reshape every aspect of his empire. Let me show you something fascinating about Aurangzeb that most historians overlook. While everyone focuses on his religious policies, his real genius lay in administration. Within months of taking power, he did something unprecedented. He ordered a complete audit of the empire's finances. The treasury, despite its glittering surface, was hemorrhaging money. His father's elaborate lifestyle and massive construction projects had nearly bankrupted the state. Aurangzeb's response: a complete overhaul of the revenue system that would make accountants today proud. He abolished 80 different taxes deemed un-Islamic, standardized weight measurements across the empire, introduced a merit-based system for tax collectors, created the empire's first comprehensive land survey. But here's the clever part. While reducing taxes on common goods, he introduced a new tax on non-Muslims, the jizya. This single decision would have far-reaching consequences nobody could have predicted. Now here's where things get complex. Aurangzeb wasn't just changing policies, he was attempting to fundamentally alter the character of the Mughal state. Picture this transformation. Royal court procedures became strictly Islamic. Sanskrit works were ordered to be translated into Persian. New Islamic courts were established in every major city. State patronage shifted from arts to religious education. But there's a crucial detail often missed. Aurangzeb didn't just impose these changes, he lived them. Unlike previous emperors who lived in luxury, he wrote copies of the Quran by hand to earn his own money, refused to wear silk or use gold vessels, slept on a simple mat, ate vegetarian meals most days. But here's something that might surprise you. During this same period of apparent religious orthodoxy, Aurangzeb employed more Hindus in high government positions than any previous Mughal ruler. Why? Because despite his personal beliefs, he was first and foremost a pragmatist who needed capable administrators. The military underwent an equally dramatic transformation. Aurangzeb introduced new cavalry tactics inspired by Central Asian warfare, revolutionary siege techniques, a modernized artillery division, the empire's first proper naval fleet. Perhaps the most significant change was in how the empire was governed. Aurangzeb established what we might call the first proper bureaucracy in Indian history. He would personally review hundreds of documents daily, often working 18-hour days. His famous quote reveals his philosophy: "The throne of a king is not a bed of roses, but a seat of thorns." But these changes came at a cost. The old guard of the empire was growing increasingly uneasy. Hindu Rajput allies, who had been crucial to Mughal power for generations, began to question their position. And in the Deccan, a new threat was emerging, one that would obsess Aurangzeb for the rest of his life. One incident perfectly captures this period of transformation. When presented with a petition complaining about his long working hours, Aurangzeb responded, "How can I sleep when my people are awake? I have not been sent here to live in comfort, I am here to serve." But this dedication to duty would soon be tested in ways he never imagined. As Aurangzeb's new policies took hold, resistance began to build. In the Deccan, a young Maratha warrior named Chhatrapati Shivaji, also named as Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, was gathering strength. And in the north, a new religious movement was about to challenge everything Aurangzeb stood for. The empire was about to face its greatest test yet. By 1670, Aurangzeb sat on the mightiest throne in Asia, commanding an army of over 500,000 men. But power, as he was about to learn, doesn't guarantee peace. 3 challenges would emerge that would test not just his empire, but his very conviction. Let's start with what Aurangzeb considered his greatest headache: Chhatrapati Shivaji and the Marathas. But this wasn't just a simple rebellion. It was a masterclass in guerrilla warfare that would change military history forever. While Aurangzeb's massive armies moved like well-oiled machines, Chhatrapati Shivaji's forces moved like water, flowing around obstacles, striking unexpectedly, and disappearing into the mountains. The Marathas didn't just fight differently, they challenged the very nature of how wars were won. In 1674, something happened that would infuriate Aurangzeb. Chhatrapati Shivaji crowned himself as Chhatrapati Maharaj, king of the Marathas. But here's what most people don't know. When Aurangzeb received this news, he didn't fly into a rage as expected. Instead, he wrote in his diary, "A fox has crowned himself a lion. Let us see how long he can maintain this illusion." Meanwhile, in the north, a more subtle but equally dangerous situation was developing. The Rajputs, longtime pillars of Mughal power, were slipping away. Why? Because Aurangzeb had broken an unwritten rule of Mughal politics, the balance between Islamic law and pragmatic tolerance. Here's a revealing moment. When his most trusted Rajput general, Jaswant Singh, died, Aurangzeb made a crucial mistake. Instead of honoring the traditional succession, he tried to convert Jaswant's young heir to Islam. This single decision would spark a Rajput rebellion that would drain imperial resources for years. But perhaps the most complex challenge came from an unexpected quarter, religious resistance. And not just from Hindus, but from within the Islamic community itself. The Sikhs, under Guru Tegh Bahadur, posed a unique challenge to Aurangzeb's vision of religious uniformity. In 1675, Aurangzeb made a decision that would haunt his legacy forever. The execution of Guru Tegh Bahadur would transform the Sikh community from a religious movement into a militant force. As one court chronicler wrote, "The emperor has extinguished a lamp, only to light 1,000 fires." Aurangzeb's response to these challenges revealed both his strength and his fatal flaw. He launched what would become known as the Three-Front War, in the Deccan against the Marathas, in Rajputana against the rebellious chiefs, in Punjab against the rising Sikh power. But here's the crucial detail. For the first time, the Mughal military machine began to show signs of strain. The cost of these continuous campaigns was staggering. The treasury began to deplete, trade routes became unsafe, agricultural production suffered, tax collection became irregular. What many don't realize is that Aurangzeb personally tried to address this by melting down his own gold vessels, reducing court expenses, writing copies of the Quran to earn personal income, living an increasingly austere life. By 1680, Aurangzeb made a decision that would define the rest of his reign. He would personally lead the campaign in the Deccan, leaving the comfort of the north forever. What he didn't know was that this would become a 27-year odyssey that would consume the rest of his life. But as Aurangzeb moved south with his massive army, he was about to discover that some enemies can't be defeated by force alone. And in the harsh terrain of the Deccan, the mighty Mughal war machine was about to meet its greatest challenge yet. 1681. The world's richest emperor abandons his capital, moving his entire court south. This wasn't just a military campaign, it was an obsession that would consume the final quarter century of Aurangzeb's life. What drove a 63-year-old man to undertake such a massive gamble? The Deccan wasn't just another territory, it was a different world altogether. Imagine a landscape where mighty fortresses sat atop virtually impregnable hills, where dense forests concealed guerrilla armies, and where every victory seemed to spawn 2 new rebellions. This was Aurangzeb's new reality. What made the Deccan campaign so different from anything the Mughals had faced before was its sheer complexity. The geography itself became their greatest enemy. Over 100 hill fortresses dotted the landscape, each requiring massive resources to capture and hold. The Marathas proved to be unlike any enemy the Mughals had faced. They refused to engage in conventional battles where Mughal superiority would prevail. Instead, they perfected the art of lightning raids, striking supply lines and isolated units before melting away into the landscape they knew intimately. The transformation of Aurangzeb during this period was remarkable. The man who once ruled from bejeweled thrones now lived in a simple tent, moving constantly with his army. One Portuguese observer wrote, "The emperor lives like a soldier in the field, forgetting all the pleasures of his palace." The siege of Bijapur became a testament to both Aurangzeb's determination and the campaign's crushing difficulty. For 15 months, the imperial army surrounded the fortress. Aurangzeb, despite his age, personally led reconnaissance missions. When Bijapur finally fell in 1686, he wrote his famous words, "Victory is sweet, but maintaining it is bitter." He couldn't have known how prophetic these words would prove. The fall of Bijapur and Golconda revealed the campaign's cruel irony. Rather than weakening the Marathas, these conquests removed the buffer states that had previously contained them. Now Maratha raiders could strike directly at Mughal territories, turning each victory into a strategic liability. The cost was staggering. The campaign devoured imperial resources at an unprecedented rate. The annual military expenditure tripled, with nearly half the empire's revenue poured into this seemingly bottomless pit. Countless soldiers perished, not just from battle but from disease and exhaustion. Each captured fortress required a garrison, spreading the once mighty army dangerously thin across hostile territory. By 1695, even Aurangzeb's most trusted general, Zulfikar Khan, suggested returning north. The emperor's response revealed his tortured state of mind. "How can I return unsuccessful? What answer will I give to Allah for this failure of protecting Islam in the Deccan?" As the campaign dragged on, the empire began to crack under the strain. The northern provinces, starved of attention and resources, fell into disorder. Tax collection became irregular, trade routes grew unsafe, and the sophisticated administrative systems began to fail. Yet Aurangzeb persisted, becoming almost a prisoner of his own ambition. By 1700, an extraordinary reality emerged. The mighty Mughal army, still undefeated in major battles, was losing the war. The Marathas had perfected a strategy of avoiding direct confrontation while bleeding the empire through countless small wounds. It was death by 1,000 cuts. As he watched his dream of complete conquest slip away, Aurangzeb wrote words that would haunt history. "I came alone, and I go alone. I have not done well by the country or its people. My years have gone by profitless." The man who sought to create the perfect Islamic state was watching it crumble before his eyes. Dawn breaks over the Deccan plateau in 1705. In a modest tent, illuminated by a single oil lamp, sits the most powerful man in Asia. At 87, Aurangzeb's hands tremble as he writes his final letters. The master of an empire spanning continents now spends his evenings sewing prayer caps to earn money for his own burial shroud. Time had transformed the emperor. Gone was the stern conqueror who once declared he would reshape an empire in Allah's image. In his place sat a contemplative old man, wrestling with the consequences of his choices. His letters from this period reveal someone haunted not by the fear of death, but by the weight of his legacy. Each morning began the same way. Rising before dawn for prayers, the emperor would sit cross-legged on a worn prayer mat, personally reading petitions and military reports. Despite his failing eyesight, he insisted on reviewing every document himself. "An emperor's duty," he would say, "ends only with his last breath." The reports arriving daily painted a grim picture. Maratha raiders struck ever closer to his camp. Provincial governors sent desperate pleas for reinforcements. The treasury hemorrhaged gold. Yet Aurangzeb continued his routine, as if through sheer force of will he could hold his fragmenting empire together. In these final years, Aurangzeb wrote extensively to his sons. These letters reveal his growing awareness of mortality and legacy. "The color of the world changes every moment," he wrote. "Every breath taken is a step toward death. My greatest mistake was to forget that no empire can be built on fear alone." As his strength faded, the crisis deepened. His sons, sensing the end approaching, began positioning themselves for succession. The same tragic cycle that brought Aurangzeb to power was preparing to repeat itself. He saw this with painful clarity, writing, "The sins of the father become the inheritance of the sons." Perhaps the most remarkable transformation was spiritual. The man who once confidently imposed his religious vision on millions now questioned his own understanding of divine will. He spent long hours with religious scholars, not issuing orders but seeking answers. "I have sinned terribly," he confessed in a letter, "and I know not what punishment awaits me." February 1707. Aurangzeb's health finally failed. As death approached, he requested to be moved to Khuldabad, a place of spiritual significance. In his final order as emperor, he demanded that his burial be paid for only with money he had earned by sewing prayer caps and copying the Quran. "I came alone," he whispered to his attendant, "and alone I depart." His final letter to his eldest son reveals a man stripped of imperial pretense. "Now I am going alone. I have many sins to account for, but I do not know what will happen to me. Many terrors and doubts have risen in my heart." On February 20th, 1707, the man who had ruled the richest empire on earth died in a simple tent. Following his wishes, he was buried in an open grave with a handful of grass as his pillow. No elaborate tomb would mark his resting place. As news of his death spread across the empire, his prediction of chaos proved tragically accurate. Within decades, the mighty Mughal Empire would begin its final descent. Aurangzeb had built the largest empire in Indian history, yet his pursuit of absolute power contained the seeds of its destruction. But to understand Aurangzeb's true legacy, we must look beyond his death to the profound ways his 49-year reign would reshape the subcontinent's future. How do you measure the legacy of a man who ruled over 150 million people for half a century? Within months of Aurangzeb's death, the empire he spent his life building began to show fatal cracks. His sons plunged into a savage war of succession, repeating the very cycle their father had started. But this time, something was different. Look at what Aurangzeb left behind, an empire stretched to its absolute limits. The treasury, once overflow with gold, lay nearly empty. The army, though massive on paper, was exhausted and demoralized. The decades following Aurangzeb's death witnessed a remarkable transformation. Power didn't just shift, it shattered. The Marathas he spent decades fighting emerged stronger than ever. The Rajputs reclaimed their independence. Perhaps Aurangzeb's most lasting impact was cultural. His strict religious policies had unintended consequences. They sparked new movements of religious and cultural assertion. The Sikhs transformed from a peaceful religious community into a militant force. Ironically, some of Aurangzeb's greatest successes became the tools others would use to build their own power. His detailed revenue systems, his military organization, even his administrative framework, all were adopted and adapted by successor states. The British would later use many of these same systems to establish their own rule. Time has not softened the debates about Aurangzeb's legacy. To some, he represents the peak of Mughal power and Islamic rule in India. To others, he symbolizes religious intolerance and imperial overreach. Even today, 3 centuries later, Aurangzeb's name evokes passionate debates. Streets named after him are renamed. His policies are cited in modern political arguments. His decisions echo in contemporary discussions about religious tolerance and state power. But perhaps Aurangzeb's true legacy lies not in what he built or destroyed, but in the lessons his reign teaches us, about power and its limits, about the cost of absolute conviction, about how the choices of one leader can reshape the destiny of millions. In his final letters, Aurangzeb seemed to grasp these lessons too late. He wrote, "I have committed great sins. I know not what torment awaits me." This confession from a man who once commanded an empire reveals something profound about power, its ability to blind us to the consequences of our actions until it's too late. Looking back, we see in Aurangzeb's reign a pivotal moment when medieval India began its transition to the modern era. His attempts to create a perfect Islamic state paradoxically accelerated forces that would transform the subcontinent in ways he never intended. In the end, Aurangzeb's story is more than just a tale of empire. It's a reminder that even the mightiest rulers are, in the end, human. Their triumphs and failures, their certainties and doubts, their ambitions and regrets, all become part of the great tapestry of history, teaching lessons to those wise enough to learn from them. History remembers Aurangzeb as many things: conqueror, zealot, administrator, ascetic. But perhaps what makes his story so compelling isn't just what he achieved or destroyed. It's what his journey reveals about power, conviction, and the price of ambition. Think back to where we began, a young prince, third in line to the throne, memorizing the Quran while mastering warfare. We watched him transform from an unlikely heir to a master strategist, from a military commander to an emperor who would reshape a civilization. The grandest irony of Aurangzeb's reign lies in its contradictions. He expanded the empire to its greatest extent, yet sowed the seeds of its collapse. He sought to create the perfect Islamic state, yet his actions united diverse groups against Mughal rule. But beyond the emperor, there was a man. In his final letters, we glimpse someone far more complex than the stark portraits painted by either his admirers or critics. A ruler haunted by the weight of his decisions. Today, as nations grapple with questions of religious identity, state power, and cultural diversity, Aurangzeb's story feels remarkably current. His struggles with balancing faith and governance, unity and diversity, power and justice, these aren't just historical footnotes. Perhaps the most profound lesson from Aurangzeb's life is about the nature of power itself. All his might, all his conviction, all his relentless pursuit of an ideal empire, none of it could guarantee the future he envisioned. As he wrote in his final days, "The world is a bridge, pass over it, but build no house upon it." When we look at Aurangzeb's reign, we're not just studying the past, we're seeing a reflection of timeless questions. How do we balance different beliefs in one society? Can power be both absolute and just? What price are we willing to pay for our convictions? His answers to these questions shaped an empire. Our answers continue to shape our world. In the end, Aurangzeb's greatest legacy might be as a warning about the limits of human ambition. His simple grave in Kuldabad, unmarked by the grand domes that shelter other Mughal emperors, seems to whisper across centuries, even the mightiest emperor cannot command the winds of time. As we close this chapter of history, remember, Aurangzeb's story isn't just about an emperor who ruled India 3 centuries ago. It's about the eternal struggle between power and wisdom, between conviction and compromise, between the empire we wish to build and the legacy we actually leave behind. In understanding his journey, perhaps we can better navigate our own. Thank you for joining me on this historical journey. If you found value in these insights from the past, please share this video and subscribe for more explorations of history's most fascinating stories. As Aurangzeb himself wrote, "The art of governance is this, that one should not take away the world from oneself, nor give up religion. For the world lasts but a moment, and religion lasts until the end." Remember, as Aurangzeb's story shows us, history isn't just about the past. It's a mirror reflecting our present choices and future possibilities. See you next week for another journey through time. Remember to ring that notification bell, because next week we're exploring another incredible story that most history books won't tell you about. This is Bites of Goats, where we don't just talk about history, we learn from it. See you in the next one.